And just like that, Wandavision is over. But hey, that doesn't mean our wacky magical hijinks in the MCU are over. No, chances are they are just getting started. Wanda has freed the town of Westview from her control, defeated Agatha Harkness and the government-controlled Vision, and recovered one of the rarest magical tombs in the MCU, the Darkhold. But what is this creepy, glowing book of scariness? Today's video is going to cover the magical origins and a brief history of the Shiatra Book of the Damned, aka the Book of Sins, aka the Darkhold. The Darkhold made its first comic appearance in Marvel Spotlight number 4, during one of the first appearances of Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night. The origin of the Darkhold is fairly unrelated to the characters present in WandaVision, but this is just the tomb's first appearance and not its true origins. So if you don't care about its first appearance and you just want to get to the lore of the book, jump forward to the timestamp that you see on the screen right now. So we're going to blast through the origin's first appearance. Jack Russell was born Jacob Rusoff, the descendant of Gregor Rusoff, a Transylvanian scholar. Gregor's descendant, Grigory, unknowingly brought a curse upon his family line in 1795 when he was bitten by a werewolf in the service of Dracula. This inflicted his descendants with the curse of lycanthropy, aka turning into a werewolf. This was a condition that Jack was, not too hyped to have. And I don't really want to waste too much time discussing the origins of Werewolf by Night, but I did think you needed to know that in order to understand the rest of the story. Jack awakens from a nightmare to find a man lurking around his house. The man turned out to be a reporter named Buck Cowan. Rather than, murdering him, the two discuss a part of Jack's inheritance as part of a story. That inheritance is a castle that was left to him, but that his stepfather sold to a man named Miles Blackgar. Blackgar had the castle shipped to the United States and put on an isolated island. Inside of the castle was said to be a book of magical spells related to the occult. This book is called, you guessed it, the Darkhold. Jack agrees to help find the book with the understanding that some of the passages may help cure him of his lycanthropy. Jack and Buck travel to the island via boat, but they're captured by Miles's henchmen, and Miles introduces himself to Jack and does the classic, "This is my island. Your find escape is quite impossible." Jack is left in the care of Miles's daughter Marlene, and she tells him, for some reason, the location of the Darkhold because I think she feels bad for him, and Jack breaks out of the confines and locates the Darkhold, and then immediately turns into a werewolf. So we learn that this island has been converted into like a weird Island of Dr. Moreau type situation where this guy Miles is turning people into monsters and messing around with the Darkhold, and the rest of the issue is Jack just plowing through monsters and henchmen inside of the castle, and eventually he throws Blackgar out of a window. Marlene turns out to be a mutant, a Gorgon with the power to turn anybody to stone by gazing at them, which she does to Jack. And when the full moon lowers, it transforms Jack back into a human and reverses the spell cast by the Gorgon's gaze. Jack and Buck return to the castle and take the Darkhold, forcing a final showdown with Marlene, who wants the book back to help her now crippled father. She accidentally kills her own henchman and attempts to use her gaze again on Jack, but it backfires, causing her to turn into a statue. So that is the book's first appearance, but since we're not going to talk about Werewolf by Night anymore, and you're probably here because of WandaVision, let's talk about all that stuff now. In terms of the book's origins, that's where we get into some really cool stuff. Within the Marvel comic book universe, there's an elder god of Earth known as Chthon, or Chthon. I like to say Chthon, and if it's wrong, I don't care. Don't be a jerk about it in the comments section. That's just how I say it. Chthon was a demigod, otherwise known as Chaos Incarnate. Chthon spent millions of years devoting himself to channeling and mastering black magic. These early gods of Earth eventually began to prey on one another to gain more power, and Gaia, the elder god of nature, gave birth to a being known as Atum, who was the first of a new race of elder gods in order to combat them. Atum fought back against the demons of Earth and became known as Demogorge, the God Eater. Chthon, fearing for his life from the elder god, went about the task of inscribing all of his wretched knowledge onto parchments made of stone, and over time these parchments were translated into scrolls which became known as the Scrolls of Chthon. Now, Chthon fled to a dimension of his own making, never to return, except, he tries to return. like all the time. It's kind of his thing. Through backup stories in the Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme series, we find the ancient history of mankind's first run-ins with the Darkhold. The scrolls first came to mankind's possession around the year 18,500 BC, when a sorceress, Thulsa Doom, became aware of them. After she was killed by Khal the Conqueror, her followers banded together, becoming known as the Darkholders, and they used them to do some shady junk like create the first vampire and much later introduce werewolves. And pretty much any time the Darkhold shows up in comics, these guys show up with it, and they're pretty straightforward occultists who use the Darkhold to influence others in an attempt to release Chthon from his dimension. The scrolls would not come to be known as the Darkhold, though, until the Hyborian Age of around 500 BC, when the Dark Witch Morgan Le Fay collected all of the scrolls finally and bound them together for the first time. She then does the one thing that you don't want to do with these things, and she temporarily frees Chthon, but he proved to be too hard to control, so he got locked up in a mountain called Wundagore. The book was then kinda stolen away by one of Morgan Le Fay's followers, her lover Magnus, and the book ended up being destroyed by Saint Brendan of the Church. The Darkhold was then gone forever. Or was it? No, of course it wasn't destroyed. It was eventually 600 years later recollected by the mad monk Alfric, who was then almost immediately killed by an angry mob, so I think you can kind of see the pattern here. Pretty much any time anybody uses the Darkhold, they just immediately get killed or hurt, or something bad happens to them. The scrolls were collected again and again and again, passing through the hands of the Church, vampires like Dracula and Varney, werewolves, occultists, each person wanting the book for its own goals. And this leads me to Wanda Maximoff herself. See, Chthon was directly involved in a lot of aspects of Wanda's development into a powerful magic user within the comics. It was his blessing as a young child that allowed Wanda to channel chaos magic in general. Chthon would attempt to possess Wanda and use her as a vessel, but each time she would find a way to break free of his attempts. The book has a number of magical spells within it, but the most famous and most talked about in Marvel Comics history are the ability to access the Dark Force, a mystical power from the Dark Dimension, which we'll have a massive MCU video on later. The book is also directly responsible for the creation of vampires, which is also directly responsible for the creation of werewolves. And because the book was directly responsible for creating those creatures, it's also believed that the Darkhold also has passages to destroy all of them as well, so it's obviously a very important magical artifact for those species. The book also has the ability to teach the user to access Limbo. It can empower the bearer with Dark Force energy, or even, as we've mentioned before, summon the Elder God Chthon himself, which is never a good thing. As we mentioned before, his end goal seems to always be destroy everything. You gotta hate those guys, it's kind of one-dimensional. And that is it for the Darkhold, but I'm sure that it's going to show up a lot in the MCU as we have way more appearances of Wanda Maximoff and Doctor Strange coming up, and there's a lot of implications in the show WandaVision about the Darkhold and what its capabilities will be within the MCU. Thank you guys for watching this video. This has been Nick from Key Issues, and if you enjoyed this video and you learned a lot, then please remember to like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching, and remember the motto: the Darkhold over everything.